Hello, I'm alone in Finland. This is EVE Online, and oh, I tell you, I'm pissed off. I've recorded 4 videos on this same subject, and as I went through, I wasn't happy with particular ones. I went to do a bit of modification here and change what I said and stuff like that. And as I've just imported them all into DaVinci, I've realised that there is no sound on any of them, and my microphone is hooked up, but it is hooked up to the wrong computer. So it looks like it's active, but it wasn't. So that is 4 hours of my life that I'm not going to get back. So here's some of the video footage, and you might get some stuff out of time, and I'll link in some other stuff, because I want to go through a few things here that I actually think are quite good things, but then some of the negativity as well, because there was a previous video that I was going to do that I half made until I realised what was going on with my computer, and before there was an incident where a whole load of water dropped through my computer, which is always fun. But in general, there has been some interesting stuff going on, and some of it I wasn't particularly comfortable with. Something I've not seen before from a community reaction. And then obviously we've had this new release that's brought in some new ships and things like this, which is part of the reason I've gone back to doing a bit of exploration, is because this is where you find some of the components, especially in relic sites. For those of you that don't know, the new ships that have come out, the 2 of them, there's a destroyer and a battle cruiser, that to get the blueprints you require 8 of them. And you require a lot of it. Originally, one of the videos I saw showed that you could sort of get these for around about 38 of them, and you could sort of RNG your way to getting them. But unfortunately, it's actually, for the battle cruiser, it's 2,000 something, it's 800 and something for the destroyer, and at the current market value of about 2 million of 8 of them, it means that you're spending billions for these ships. So they are out of people's reach for the moment, which is, it causes a separate problem that we'll get into. However, as you can see here in front of you, I'm doing a bit of exploration. I'm away out, where am I? Cloud Ring. And this is just one of the things that I've just filmed and jumped out here, and I'm doing a little bit of a run through the thing. As I'm sort of going through this, one of the things that sort of caused me to change what I was doing with this particular video was the new ships. And if we actually have a look at some of these, I will sort of scroll through my footage. When the new ships came out, I went and had a look at them in the game, and I thought it was very interesting, because the first thing that popped up, if you have a look here, we have the new destroyer, the Tholos, which I'm looking at my screen, but I'm looking on DaVinci, so it's all tiny. But as soon as I turned to the back of it, I recognised one of the parts. Straight away, you've got the top section, which is off of the Thrasher destroyer, which I think is fantastic, that they're now doing a bit of kit bashing. And this is something, if you know my videos, you know I've been saying for a while, new ships are always a good idea. Even if they're not better, they don't have to be better, they don't have to be changes. Just having more is something that is a little bit of shininess and gives back to the community. It can cause balance issues, but I think that you could rectify that by not having them as powerful as existing ships, and having maybe, for instance, a civilian class of ship, or things that are just sort of copy-pasted skills, different versions of the same thing. Maybe change a little bit of armour here and there, but have minimal things that need balance passes. But just more of, because in general that will give something a little bit of difference, a little bit of variance. And you could have, especially if you've got variations of things, you could have fleet doctrines where you have multiple ships that are roughly the same that can fit in the fleet doctrine. So there's a little bit of variation there. But the thing that really got me is this particular ship. So as we can see here, this new battle cruiser from the Deathless Circle, essentially if you look straight at it, immediately you can see the 2 wings on the side. They are uneven, but they are very reminiscent, and as you see here, we've got a tornado. So a tornado's been cut in 2, and then in the middle somebody's had a ferox, and when you look at the back end of it, we have the back end off of a hurricane. So you have a kit bashed model here, which is fantastic, and it looks glorious. For me personally, I particularly like the ferox, because when I was a new gamer, in Eve, like I think within my first week, I was undocking in the starter system, and as I was going to do something, a Ferox undocked behind me, and it was massive compared to my starter ship, and it just sort of wiped over the top of me, and I thought that was amazing and huge. And so there's a little bit of reminiscing that comes in with seeing a bit of that ship in something else, which I think is something that might be a good thing I hadn't sort of thought about before with the kit bashing, is that you can see little bits of other ships. So I think that not just from the ease of design, but also from the whole reminiscing and seeing little bits that have been converted together, that's something that is particularly good. And especially when you've got, I know the models aren't in the game anymore for the Jove, but if you start bringing in Jove tech and taking a little bit of inspiration from the older ships, that is something that would work as well. And it works on many different levels. For instance, you've got the haulers and things like that. I know I'm always harping on about haulers, but I spend a lot of my time in them, and I quite like the looks and the shapes and stuff like this. I think it is a massively underused section, because there is no faction haulers. An underused section of the game that needs a little bit more attention, especially when you consider how much of the player base actually use these industrials on a regular basis. But with that being said, there's also a problem with this, and the problem is very interesting, because one of the things that happens when a new ship comes out is the new ship is going to have a higher value. You're basically talking supply and demand. There isn't enough supply for the demand of everybody wanting a new shiny one. And this is something I made a previous video on in manufacturing, because I was taking the Kurzel and I was making them very quickly just by buying the blueprints, buying the materials, churning them out in Jita and selling them for a profit very quickly using all of my manufacturing slots, which even with very low overheads, like very low margins for profit, they were selling so fast because they were a new shiny thing that I was making billions in profit while manufacturing in Jita 4.4, which is the worst place to manufacture in the game because of how much it costs, but I was still turning a massive profit because of how much I was doing. So this is something that is always expected. But one of the things that's come from this is these new shiny ships, we were all given the expert system. So if I'm not sure if it applies to Alpha, but it definitely applies to Omega, where you were given an expert system where you plug that in and you've got all the skills for a little while so that you can fly these new shiny ships. The problem with that is that there's a 30-day limit on it, and the ships are so rare that to buy one of them it's going to cost billions. Now this is an understood and known factor. This always happens with new stuff. However, what the devs would know going into this that we didn't is that with a new route to get them, the problem is that these particular ships are further beyond the reach of most players because we are harvesting out of them. You need thousands of them to get some of the ships. It would take so long to do that the ships are going to be even more scarce than anything that's come before. So the chances of most people getting them within that 30 days means that that token is worthless. But the thing is that all they would have to do is take the time limit off it, and not everything that they give you as a reward is time limited. So that little change, that little thought process would have actually been beneficial to the community, and they missed that. And I think that's a shame, because that sort of, the way that it's put forward is, I don't think that this is the way that it happened, but I do think this is the way it comes across, where they specifically put something out and it kind of looks like they've time limited it for no good reason, which is probably just because it's a standard time limit. But it looks like they're forcing you to try and spend a bit of money. They're trying to incentivize you. And with everything else in Eve that does that, that is trying to whale you essentially to make you spend money, like for instance the constant time limited, oh you should buy Omega when you're a new player, you've got this deal and it'll only last for 14 hours, oh that 14-hour deal is over, oh well you've got this other one that'll last for a month, it's the exact same deal, so the first one was kind of bullshit and we were just pressuring you into something. With that attitude that's already there in Eve and being called out by a lot of people on the internet, and especially some particularly big people, Pirate Software has mentioned about this, about how predatory the game is, which is turning a lot of players off of this. This is something that really needs addressed by the devs because it looks awful. And while I don't think this was a deliberate action, I think it was a mistake. I think somebody needs to be looking at that within CCP, because while you can whale people and you can make a lot of money off of some simpler people that are willing to support this, at the end of the day, you're not going to become a better game for it. You are falling into that loop of having to create predatory stuff to keep going because you're not getting more players into the game. And I think that's a problem, whereas if you make it more honest, then that's where you get a game where people are willing to support, because they're willing to support a good action as opposed to willing to incentivize predatory behaviour. Now, with that being said, because that's not the only part where this is, the other part that I wanted to talk to, and I have talked about it many times on many videos that didn't have any sound on, was a recent developer stream. Now, the stream was just before this came out, and it was involving CCP Ritani, CCP Burger, two other guys. I apologise if I don't remember the names. I'm going to call one of them CCP Beard because his beard was massive. But these guys had a bit of a thing on Twitch where they went on and they talked through the development stuff, and it was kind of a casual discussion. But the thing that caught me that I've never seen before, and this is actually the longest time I've spent on Twitch in quite some time, of possibly ever, because I watched the entire thing, was the fact that in the comment section, people were not welcoming of their comments. It was more than half against. There was very little support. Now, there was a little bit of the problem of some people being a little bit less educated about what was going on. There was some things where they were shouting down people for being wrong when they weren't, which is usual internet stuff. But in general, the vast majority were not receptive to what was being said. And I can understand why, and I want to highlight one particular thing. It's sort of two things combined into one. Because one thing, and I believe it was CCP Ritani was saying this, where he was talking about how people don't see their plan. And he was saying about, for instance, with the Skinner, you have this thing where they have a bit of a plan, but what we're seeing and what is released that we are seeing is not the whole thing. So when you see a single aspect of it out of context, you don't understand the full scale of it. Therefore, you're not informed. Now, I can understand that comment. I don't disagree with that comment, but it shows two fatal flaws. The first one is that if the people aren't informed about it, therefore they're going to make incorrect assumptions. That's a problem with the dev team, not a problem with the player base. And the perfect example of this is Face Punch Studios, who puts all of their stuff out there. They've got roadmaps for all the stuff they're doing. They keep their player base informed. The YouTubers that cover the changes and things like that to Rust talk about subject to change and in concept limbo and things like this. It is a known aspect of the game because all of this is out and open. So if your player base is having some hate at you for not telling them, well, tell them. Make your roadmaps, put your plans out there. Doesn't matter if they change, inform them of the change. But the more information out there, the less hate you're going to get back, because they will understand at least a big chunk of the concept. And that's something that is a problem within EVE in general, is that there's a lack of transparency to what's going on. And with that, another example of this, which was sort of in the same thing but discussed by somebody else, was when they were talking about the Skinner. And the Skinner, in my opinion, is the perfect example of the lack of transparency in EVE, because what they were talking about is that the Skinner has more aspects that are coming, that they're going to change it, that they're going to add in all of these facilities and things like this. There is a lot of plans behind this, and it's all going to help the players. Now, I can understand that, I can agree with that. However, it is missing out the biggest part of the Skinner. The Skinner, at its absolute core, is a revenue stream for EVE. It is another reason to buy Plex. It is another shiny to spend money. Plex is a way to get money into CCP to continue developing the game. And CCP do not acknowledge this, and in fact when they were talking about Skinner, they were going out of their way to not talk about how you have to spend money to use this. Oh, you could buy Plex in-game. Most people don't. There are some people that buy Plex in-game, but the ones that are generating enough ISK are usually the ones that are not paying for the game, because they have those revenue streams established from 20 years in the game and all sorts of stuff, as opposed to the ones that actually spend the money in the game and will buy Plex. That needs to be discussed about as an open thing. because some people accept it, some people are fanboying enough that they ignore it, but then there are people external to the game who might want to play it that see that for what it is. It is a lie about what the purpose of the skinner is. Now, going back to Facepunch Studios. If you don't know, Facepunch Studios sells Rust for a set price. You pay one thing. One of the reasons that they're able to do that is because, unlike CCP, they don't have to maintain many servers. They only have a couple of standard servers, and then everything you can maintain your own. People do. That's where the community is. CCP has larger overheads than that because we're talking about a big server cluster that is something phenomenal to have to maintain, so they need a lot of money in that. But what happens with Rust is that they release skins. Every week on Steam, there is a few extra skins. They change once in a while. There's occasionally a few items that come up. Some of the skins are designed by the community, and whoever makes them in the community will get a little bit of kickback from those. They're usually a higher value. The skins range from, I think it's from like 80 cents up to about €2, and then you'll get special items for like Christmas or stuff like this that are a bit higher. Then they also do their DLCs, and their DLCs are usually stuff that is hysterically the opposite of pay to win. Like, for instance, the musical DLC that allowed people to have fantastic musical instruments with MIDI support and piss off everybody. It was just brilliant. But that stuff is something that the community is willing to support. I still buy skins for Rust even though I haven't played it for 2 years, because that development, that open and honesty is something that's fantastic, and I'd love to support that as support developers that are doing that. I also would like to go back into the game every once in a while and play it. Just not had the time because of life, but that is something that I'm willing to support. Now, we know that there are people that are willing to support EVE. We know there are people throwing in hundreds or thousands of pounds into EVE. So why is it that CCP isn't just honest with that and say, right, Plex is something that generates us income to allow us to continue doing what we are doing. Everybody understands that. The people that don't understand that, they're never going to. If you don't understand that it requires money to maintain a server, and you're sat there going, well, why do I have to pay for the thousands of pounds worth of equipment in the game that I want to play? Well, I can't help you there. I mean, I would go back to school essentially. But most people understand that and they're willing to support it. But being dishonest about the motivation for something and saying, well, this is just for the players, this is just giving back to the players. No, it is enhancing an extra revenue stream primarily. Money is the driving force, creating an extra revenue stream, but also in that giving something back to the players. And that's a good thing. You're giving something to the players, you're providing yourself. There are two different sort of aspects to that. I would argue that they should make it cheaper. I would argue that they should quarter the price, because if it's cheaper and more affordable, more people will take advantage of it. It's one of those reverse sort of things. When you make something cheaper, more people will use it. More people use it, you generate more money overall. This is a sort of simplistic thing, but it's happened in so many different places. I think that that is something that they should definitely look at, and even just doing it as a temporary offer for like a couple of weeks to see how it happens. Say, for instance, at Christmas, drop the price to a quarter, see what happens. I guarantee that they'd make more money in that time than before, because I personally, if it was 10-isk to create a skin, I would dump a whole load in and make a whole load of my ships look the same. And then probably in a year's time, when I got bored of that colour scheme, I'd go and have a look at a new colour scheme, if the money was that sort of that little that you could do it. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at. But the example that I want to give of why I think it's deliberately misleading is, one of the developers was talking about this, and he was talking about how good the skinner is and the advantages and stuff like this. And he specifically gave the example of if you're in a fleet fight and that entire fleet shows up against you, and you've got hundreds of people in that fleet and they are all the same colour. And I'm sat there going, you've played this game for 20 years. You've been a developer for as long as I've known you, like known the game. So you know what a fleet fight is. You know that in a fleet fight, you are zoomed out to maximum. You are in time dilation. You're waiting for orders. You're not flicking going, oh, the new people that arrived are all pretty. You are picking targets. So that in itself is just a kind of dishonest representation when you know that. Yeah, sure, having an entire corporation in shiny colours that are all the same, having that sort of unity is always a good thing, but that particular example is horseshit. And that sort of speaks to that little bit of propaganda as opposed to community. Because going out there and going saying, this is something that we want as a revenue stream. We are lacking in a bit of funds. We should have a look at something else. And this is one of the ways that we thought we could do this without increasing prices, without doing any of this stuff. Because a lot of people are ticked off at the fact that Eve is €20 a month. Completely forgetting the fact that it's one of the most complex server clusters in internet gaming. And the fact that the prices for that server cluster in the past 4 years have jumped through the roof because the server cluster is power and power bills have skyrocketed, and they are finding a way to do it without maintaining it. A lot of people were pissed off that the price for the game went from €14 to €20 a while back, completely missing the fact that if you had actually adjusted for general interest, the general inflation over that time, it would be far higher than €20. So yes, there are people that complain about this, but just being honest about the reality knocks those on the head if you're being completely honest about these things. So I think that's something that needs to be adjusted within the actual higher levels of CCP, is to go, right, we are getting shit online. We are getting shit from outside of our community that is stopping people coming into our community, that is disparaging our game in a way that we can't disprove. For instance, Pirate Software talking about his experiences in Poshvin. I don't disagree with anything the man's saying. He was entirely right. I disagree with another video of his about Eve where he was talking about pay to win, because as I've said many times, there is no pay to win in Eve because there is no winning in Eve. There is pay. There is people putting money into it. But it's the same as Grand Theft Auto, where if you're putting money into it, you might get a shiny out of it, but you're not winning anything, you're not changing anything. It's just something shiny that will eventually go the way of the ghost. So that is a bit of disagreement, but what he was saying about the response to that situation, the fact that it was so cloaked, that might not be, his experience might not be the truth of what happened. But who's to say, because we don't see that, because it is sort of put to the back end. There is that little bit of hiding what's going on. Maybe that's a cultural thing within the game development team, maybe it's just a sort of perception of what's going on. But one of the things that they were talking about with the community not understanding their plans is nice and simple. The community doesn't understand because they don't know the plans. If you put your plan out there, if you put your roadmap out there, then that's nice and simple. Another way that this could be fixed is something that I personally experienced, where I came back into the game, I lost a ship, and I'm sat there going, what the hell just happened? And what had actually happened was the warp core stabilizers had been turned to an active module. Okay. And somebody says, well, you need to read the patch notes. I took a 4-year break and then came back into a game. I am not reading a novel longer than War and Peace when I come back to a game. If that is the requirement, that is prohibitive, plain and simple. Nobody's sitting down and reading all of the patch notes of everything that's going on, because I don't have a day and a half to spend to come back into a game. I want to pick it up and play it. The module, the warp core stabilizer, doesn't state on it that it's an active module. There is no warning that it's changed. So something in the game that worked has changed. You should be informed about that. There should be a way that is user friendly to tell you about that change, which is the same thing I've talked about, where they changed the entire fundamentals of how the security system worked when it comes to the faction warfare. And I've forgotten what you call it within the faction warfare, where all of a sudden high sec is now low sec becomes null sec. So you're warping through low sec and a bubble appears, and you sat there going, how the fuck is this going on? Because you haven't gone through the patch notes, because you've come back far after this change has happened, and you've sat there going, what? What the hell? Oh, well, it was in the patch notes. Yeah, so is everything else. The patch notes are decades long. Some people come back after 10 years, and you need to make that reintroduction more friendly. You need to put those warnings out, especially when you do these things, because it's transparency. But if you're somebody, say for instance, it's taken, one of my mates that recently had it, where they had taken a freighter through HiSec, and they got ganked. The freighter was empty. There was no issues with it. It was not something that was a good thing, but they warped into low security. When the issue happened where low security came up, not everybody got that warning message, because some people had disabled the warning messages before that happened. So that change was a fundamental change, and your man who's flying a freighter gets ganked and went, what the hell, when he sees his pod? Who's going to gank an empty freighter? Why would they gank an empty freighter? And luckily he was frapsing at the time and went, oh, wait, how is that low sec? What's going on? And the confusion then turns to anger. And the anger then turns to somebody that went, no, screw this. Okay, one more player down. But these are simple things that can be avoided by a little bit of information, and that's what needs to happen, in my opinion. Because information is the ultimate leveler. If everybody knows what's going on, or knows the majority of what's going on, that's there. If you make a change, you present it in game. You make sure there is feedback that people will see, as opposed to feedback that may or may not happen. Getting ganked is not the entire feedback, and CCP should have learned this with the whole alpha situation, where they brought in alphas. High sec ganking rocketed thanks to Code and a few others, and all of a sudden the large chunk of the player base, a mining chunk of the player base that is the basis of what we do, left. And then a part of an answer to that, they created the Poshvin system, redistributed the ore so that Isogen was no longer in high sec, and now they are doing changes specifically to try and combat that, because that skyrocketed the price of everything. But all it would take is, we tried this, we thought this was a good idea, it's not, we're going to roll it back. That would be a simple solution to this, but instead they went, oh no, actually we're going to do this, and we're going to allow people in nullsec to rearrange their areas and have all of the ore, because we want more people in nullsec, even though we know that 80% of the player base isn't in nullsec. We want more people there. We want to try and force people to play the game the way we want them to play, as opposed to supporting everybody playing the game. However, it is a mindset that needs to be changed. You do not build a game to be played one way. You build a game, and then when you see how players play it, you support them. That's the sort of difference, and especially in an open world game. You cannot make an open world game and then get pissy about the fact that people aren't playing it the way that you would. It's an open world game. It's an online multiplayer, but multiplayer doesn't mean everybody cooperates. So I hope that's been slightly informative. Obviously, I know that for the majority of people that are sort of watching this, that are EVE educated, that know the game, know it well, they sort of know these things already. Anybody that's not seen the new ships, then go and have a look at them. They're shiny, but do not buy them for the next couple of months, because they are far too expensive and they are going to plummet in price. But do harvest, have a look at stuff like that. Go and have a look for the relic sites that have the atoms. I believe some of it's also dropping in some of the other sites, of combat anomalies and things like this. So have a look, have an explore. As usual, this is sort of my winding, ranting, complaining, all of that jazz, is both in sort of aimed for people to have a look at, a little bit informative, but at the same time it's kind of a sort of aimed a bit towards the developers, a little more than a bit towards the developers at the moment, because there are some things that I sort of see from my perspective that could be changed, that could be made better, made simple, that don't require much in the way of change. For instance, everybody's got their documents, design documents and plans and roadmaps. Publish them. It's a little bit extra work to save a lot of negativity in the community. But these things are little things that can be adopted that don't cost as much, but they make it simpler. It's like if you are familiar with programming and stuff like this, when you start programming, almost everybody starts the same way, where they learn the code and they write the code because they think in the code. And you don't see the need for pseudocode, you don't see the need for writing your markings down. And even when you get to the point of doing that, you write basic stuff, you don't think about writing it for the next person, fully explaining your values and things like this. But it's something that saves a lot of time later on. And with a game like CCP, where the developing team have been the same team for quite some time and have been stuck in quite a severe mindset for quite some time, there's definitely something that would help them with the community management, because part of the community that is not paid attention to and is far more important these days are actually the people that are not playing it but are watching it on social media. Because we have this group of people that are hearing negative things, because there are a lot of commenters out there who have tried the game and who dislike the game and who will talk about that. And you sort of see the same things coming back about it being a money pit, about it being sort of anti-player and very closed off, very secretive, not much feedback, hidden feedback. A good example of this is actually when you get reports back. If you file a claim against CCP, you're not allowed to publish that email that comes back, that explanation email. And while I can understand that, that itself shows a sort of a secrecy to it that shouldn't exist. It's risking your account to actually put one of those things out there, which I don't think is a good idea. And I can understand not wanting to get attention. I could understand making a rule that you obfuscate people's names and stuff like that when it comes to the developers. But there has never in the history of the world been a problem with putting too much information out there in a cooperative thing. Because this isn't espionage, this isn't societies against each other. This is a game and a community. It's always good to have that knowledge in the community. So that's my sort of thoughts, my sense on it. There will be some more videos. I've done a whole load of stuff, and then obviously had the problems with my microphone. I've also had an issue with a small waterfall running through my computer, which has caused unbelievable bleeding issues, especially with the moment where I can't upgrade for the next generation because the next generation's PC components and stuff like this are absolute bollocks. I'm not going about all the stuff that's online. A friend of mine that actually tested one of his stuff. He got one of the new Intel and one of the new AMD processors, and he put them against mine. Now, my current rig at the moment is an i11-900, and he had one of the 285's Intels, and one of the things that I require is single core speed for games that have physics engines like Kerbal Space Program or Space Engineers, because a lot of game engines can only run the physics engine on one particular core, so that's why I stick to Intel for the main part. But we compared benchmarks, and your man is benchmarking slower than me. His what was it, i9 14900 also benchmarked slower than mine, and it's because he had a couple of dead cores. But this is something that is concerning, so I don't particularly want to change my PC at the moment and waste some money on upgraded slots that might change in the next year or something. So it was quite a fright to have a waterfall pour through my PC, and my case has two computers in it. It's a dual case system, so it's kind of scary. So a lot of stuff has gone to fixing that and getting that all the kinks worked out, making sure everything's okay and there's no issues. So there shall be a bit of time restoring stuff, but hopefully, and I'll probably say this in every video at the moment, hopefully I'll get some more stuff out soon. There will be a bit more Space Engineers. I have to go back and restart some stuff because I got a corrupted save which may or may not have been linked to this. But as per usual when I'm talking about this stuff, if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, if you like or you dislike and you want to put likes and dislikes down, that's always fine. I'm always good for that stuff. But please put comments down. I like the comments. I like seeing why people like, why people dislike. Some of it I consider really weird. There's more than a few comments about people enjoying my voice, which I find weird, but I have no issues. I know that I have a weird accent because I've been in a lot of weird places and my accent is entirely broken. For instance, I think I just did it there, but I don't really roll my R's the way that Scottish people do, which is, I lost this. I used to be very heavy with this. But now that I live back in Finland, it's part of the requirement of Finnish. A lot of, when you're talking about things, for instance, the word perkele requires a rolled R to sound correct. And I can't really do this automatically anymore, so it's something I used to do and I've lost, so my accent sounds really weird to me. Never mind to people back home in Scotland or people that I'm talking to over here, so I get that stuff. It's just interesting to see. So as usual, comments, questions, stuff like that. If you've not done the million skill points, I think most people have done it now, but down in the link, if you're going to play or try out EVE or stuff like this, There's a little link there that'll give you 1,000,000 free skill points on your account. It'll give me a little bit of kickback. If I get 40 of them, I get a shiny ship. I think I've got like 10 or something like that at the moment. So that's always nice. But if you are planning on starting multiple accounts, you can use that same referral link yourself. You can make it in the account management on the CCP website and link it to your own account. So if you put Plex or Omega Time onto one account, you'll get a kickback onto your other accounts, and it can sort of help out that way and share the stuff. So ignore the scams in the middle of chats and stuff like this. Don't listen to anything in Jita chat. But just something in general for people that might be helpful. There is a Patreon, there is a coffee or something like that down below. If you are one of those people that has too much money and would like to support peoples, I don't really mind. We don't all have that kind of stuff. It's always welcome, it's always thankful, and I've done it to some other people, especially in Kerbal Space Program. So always a nice thing, and I can see a flashing red light and I do not know where it's from. I'm very worried about my computer. But as usual, thanks for watching, thanks for your time. Hope that was interesting, or annoying enough to give you the energy to proceed through the rest of the week. What I call the Daily Mail method. But yes, bye!